The evening wind carried a biting chill as it swept through the bustling streets of Manhattan. Crowds bustled past one another, heads buried in their scarves, feet moving with purpose. Yet, amidst this chaos, Ethan stood still. His cardboard sign, a silent plea for help, swayed slightly in the breeze. The words, "Will work for food," were scrawled in shaky, faded letters. Passers-by averted their eyes, their gazes fixed forward, as though his existence might shatter their carefully curated reality. David Grayson walked purposefully along the sidewalk, the tailored fit of his expensive coat shielding him from the cold. To the outside world, he was the embodiment of success, a self-made millionaire with an empire that bore his name. But beneath the polished surface lay a man exhausted by his wealth, searching for something more meaningful than profits and acquisitions. His steps faltered as his eyes caught Ethan's figure. Something about the man struck him. A quiet defiance in his posture, the way his eyes seemed to challenge the world, even as he stood there, a shadow among the crowd. On impulse, David stopped. "Excuse me," David said, his voice firm, but not unkind. Ethan looked up, startled. Most people pretended he didn't exist. "You talking to me?" Ethan's voice carried a mix of caution and disbelief. "Yes," David replied, taking a step closer. "What's your story?" Ethan smirked bitterly. "Story? Same as anyone out here. Life went sideways, made some bad choices, lost it all. End of story." But David didn't move on. Instead, he crouched slightly to meet Ethan's eyes, as if searching for something deeper. "And what do you want? If you could have anything, what would it be?" Ethan stared at him, suspicious. "You some kind of reporter? Or just another guy looking to ease his conscience with a few bucks?" David shook his head. "Neither. I'm just curious. You seem different." For a moment, silence hung between them, punctuated only by the distant hum of the city. Finally, Ethan sighed. "What I want? A chance. A real one. Not a handout, not pity. A chance to stand on my own feet again." David smiled faintly. "What if I could offer you that?" Ethan narrowed his eyes, his skepticism returning in full force. "And what's the catch?" "No catch," David said, his tone steady. "Just an opportunity. But you'll have to trust me." Ethan laughed humorlessly. "Trust? That's rich. You don't get to where I am by trusting people." "I understand," David said, straightening up. He pulled a sleek business card from his pocket and handed it to Ethan. "Think about it. Call me if you're ready to take a leap of faith." Ethan glanced at the card, but didn't take it. David placed it carefully on top of Ethan's sign before turning to leave. As the millionaire's figure disappeared into the crowd, Ethan's gaze dropped to the card. The name David Grayson was embossed in gold letters, accompanied by a phone number. For the first time in a long while, something akin to curiosity stirred within him. The night deepened, and the crowd thinned. Ethan remained at his post, staring at the card in his hand. He felt the weight of a decision pressing on him, a decision that could change everything. Finally, as the city lights flickered and the hum of life dulled to a whisper, Ethan slipped the card into his pocket. "Let's see what you've got, Grayson," he muttered under his breath. And with that, the wheels of an extraordinary journey began to turn. The soft hum of the heater filled the modest yet impeccably furnished apartment. Ethan stood awkwardly in the doorway, his gaze darting around the room. The space was clean, modern, and alien, so far removed from the alleys and shelters he'd called home. "You live here now," David said, gesturing casually as he loosened his tie. "Everything you need is stocked. Clothes, food, toiletries." "I don't get it," Ethan interrupted, his voice sharp with suspicion. "Why are you doing this? No one does something like this without expecting something in return. David turned, his expression calm but unreadable. I told you. I see potential in you. Call it a hunch. But if you need more clarity, let's call this an experiment. You're right. People don't just help for no reason. Maybe I want to see if I can prove them wrong. Ethan snorted, his fingers curling instinctively around the frayed strap of his worn backpack. Sounds like rich guy guilt to me. David chuckled softly. Maybe it is. But does it matter? You're here, aren't you? Ethan fell silent, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The apartment was a far cry from the streets, but he felt no comfort. Instead, he felt trapped, like a pawn in someone else's game. Hours later, Ethan sat on the edge of the plush sofa, staring at the untouched plate of food on the coffee table. His stomach growled, but the unease in his chest overpowered his hunger. He leaned back, closing his eyes, and let his mind drift to the memories that haunted him. The cold nights on the street, the humiliation of being ignored, judged, discarded, the bitter taste of regret for choices he wished he could undo. Why me? He whispered into the empty room. The next morning, David returned, this time accompanied by a woman who exuded professionalism. She was tall, with sharp features softened by a warm smile. Ethan, this is Sarah Logan. David introduced her. She's a consultant I've brought in to help coordinate the next steps of our arrangement. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Next steps? What exactly does that mean? Sarah stepped forward, her voice calm and measured. Mr. Grayson believes in structured support. My job is to ensure everything runs smoothly. Think of me as a bridge between your current situation and whatever future you decide to build. Ethan crossed his arms. A bridge, huh? Sounds like I'm some kind of project. David stepped in, his tone firm. This isn't about charity, Ethan. It's about opportunity. You said you wanted a chance to stand on your own feet. That's what I'm giving you. Ethan hesitated, the weight of their words sinking in. And if I screw this up? David's gaze didn't waver. Then it's over. Simple as that. But if you succeed, the rewards are yours to keep. Over the next few days, Ethan's life began to shift. Sarah worked tirelessly to guide him, setting up schedules, arranging meetings, and helping him adjust to his new environment. Despite her professional demeanor, there was a warmth to her interactions, a quiet empathy that reminded Ethan of the people he'd once trusted before the streets hardened him. One evening, as they worked through paperwork, Ethan decided to push back against his unease. You're too good at this, he said, watching her carefully. Why help someone like me? What's your angle? Sarah paused, her pen hovering above the page. For a moment, her composed exterior cracked, revealing a flicker of pain in her eyes. Let's just say, I know what it's like to lose everything, she said softly. Sometimes, helping someone else is the only way to heal yourself. Ethan didn't press further. He recognized that look. He'd seen it in his own reflection too many times to count. One evening, as Ethan and Sarah worked through the logistics of integrating him into a new job program, David's sister, Catherine, stormed into the apartment. Her designer heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, her face flushed with anger. David, what the hell is this? She demanded, glaring at Ethan. You're housing a random homeless man? Have you completely lost your mind? Catherine, this isn't your concern, David said, his voice steady but cold. Not my concern. You're putting our family's reputation on the line for... She gestured toward Ethan. This? What are people going to think when they find out? Ethan stiffened, his fists clenching at his sides. I'm right here, you know, he said sharply. Enough, David snapped, his tone leaving no room for argument. This is my decision, and I don't need your approval. Catherine scoffed, shaking her head. You're making a mistake, David. Don't say I didn't warn you. With that, she turned on her heel and left, the door slamming behind her. That night, Ethan sat alone on the balcony, staring out at the city lights. The confrontation replayed in his mind, stirring old insecurities he thought he'd buried. You okay? Sarah's voice broke through his thoughts. Ethan shrugged. She's right. I don't belong here. Sarah leaned against the railing, her gaze soft but unwavering. Belonging isn't about where you come from, Ethan. It's about where you're going. Don't let someone like her decide your worth. For the first time, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope, a fragile thread of belief that maybe, just maybe, he could change his story. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of Ethan's new apartment, painting warm streaks of gold on the walls. Ethan sat at the small kitchen table, staring at a bowl of untouched cereal. The echoes of laughter and clinking coffee cups from the street below were a stark reminder of the life moving on without him. A life he was struggling to join. The silence broke as David entered, his phone pressed to his ear, gesturing apologetically to Ethan. I understand the concerns, Catherine, he said tersely into the receiver. But this is my choice, no one else's. He ended the call with a sigh, running a hand through his hair. Family drama, he muttered, offering Ethan a faint smile. Ready for today? Ethan raised an eyebrow. What's today? David smirked. Your first day at work. Ethan found himself in the bustling lobby of a corporate building, his reflection caught in the gleaming glass doors. The suit he wore was tailored, but it felt like a costume, stiff and unfamiliar. Sarah appeared at his side, clipboard in hand. You'll be shadowing one of the junior analysts. Just observe for now. No pressure. No pressure? Ethan muttered, adjusting the tie that felt like a noose. As they rode the elevator, Sarah glanced at him, her tone softening. You're here because you're capable, Ethan. Don't forget that. But as the elevator doors opened, revealing a sea of polished professionals, Ethan couldn't shake the weight of doubt pressing on his chest. The day was a blur of introductions and instructions. Ethan's supervisor, a brisk young man named Alan, was efficient but curt. Stick to the basics, Alan said, shoving a stack of files into Ethan's hands. Research, data entry, and most importantly, don't screw up. Ethan nodded, biting back a retort. The hours crawled by as he fumbled through spreadsheets and struggled to make sense of the jargon-filled instructions. The whispers and sideways glances from his coworkers didn't help. Who is he? One voice whispered. Grayson's pet project, another replied, followed by a stifled laugh. Ethan's fists clenched under the desk, but he forced himself to stay composed. After work, Ethan found himself walking aimlessly through the city, his mind swirling with self-doubt. His feet led him to a familiar corner, a small park where he'd once slept during his lowest days. The bench was still there, weathered but sturdy. He sat, memories flooding back. The cold nights, the hunger, the humiliation. He pulled out the list of goals Sarah had helped him draft, the words now feeling like a cruel joke. As he sat lost in thought, a familiar voice broke through. Ethan? He looked up to see Marla, an old acquaintance from the streets. Her face lit up with recognition, but her smile quickly faded as she took in his appearance. You clean up nice, she said, her tone laced with bitterness. Guess you found a way out. It's not like that, Ethan replied, guilt tightening his chest. Marla crossed her arms. Must be nice to have someone like Grayson swoop in and fix everything. Ethan didn't respond, the weight of her words sinking in. Was that all he was? A charity case? That evening, Ethan returned to the apartment, his frustration bubbling over. He found David in the living room, reviewing documents. "Why me?" Ethan demanded, his voice sharp. David looked up, startled. "What? Why me?" Ethan repeated. Out of all the people out there, why did you choose me for this experiment?" David set the papers aside, leaning back in his chair. "Because I see something in you, Ethan. Something you don't even see in yourself." Ethan shook his head. "That's not an answer." David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Do you want the truth? Oh, fine. You remind me of someone I couldn't save." The room fell silent, the weight of David's words hanging heavy in the air. The next day, Sarah arrived with updates on Ethan's progress. She found him in the kitchen, staring at his untouched breakfast. "You're allowed to struggle," she said gently, taking a seat across from him. Ethan scoffed. "Struggle? Feels more like I'm failing." Sarah placed a hand on his. "Failure isn't falling down, Ethan. It's refusing to get back up." Her words struck a chord, but Ethan remained silent, his gaze fixed on the table. That evening, David called Ethan into his study. The room was lined with bookshelves, the rich scent of leather and wood, creating an atmosphere of quiet authority. "I've been watching your progress," David began, his tone measured. "You're struggling, but that's expected. What matters is what you do next." Ethan frowned. "What are you saying?" David slid a folder across the desk. "Inside are details of a mentorship program I want you to join. It's intensive, but it could be the key to everything you're trying to build." Ethan opened the folder, scanning the contents. The program was rigorous, but it promised to provide skills and connections that could change his life. Why are you doing this?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. David met his gaze. "Because I believe in you. But belief isn't enough. You have to prove to yourself that you're worth it." Ethan sat in the middle of a polished conference room, the city skyline stretching out behind the floor-to-ceiling windows. The room was pristine, almost intimidating, with its glass walls and sleek furniture. Across from him, Sarah Logan and David Grayson exchanged serious glances. A thick tension hung in the air. David tapped his pen against the table. "Ethan, this next phase won't be easy. It's about more than just proving yourself. It's about building trust, both with yourself and the world around you." Ethan leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Trust? That's a luxury I haven't had for a long time." David slid a folder toward Ethan. Inside were detailed profiles, financial reports, and a timeline. "I need you to assist with a project I've been working on," David began, his tone firm but not unkind. "This is your chance to step into a meaningful role." Ethan flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. It was a charity initiative targeting underprivileged communities aimed at providing job training and affordable housing. "You want me to, what? Be the face of this?" Ethan asked skeptically. David shook his head. "No, I want you to understand it, to live it. I need you to work with the people this initiative is designed to help. These are your people, Ethan. No one can bridge the gap better than you." Ethan felt a flash of indignation at David's words but held back a retort. The first day of the assignment took Ethan to a community center on the outskirts of the city. It was a modest building with chipped paint and a faded sign, but inside, the energy was palpable. Volunteers bustled about, organizing donations and helping families. Ethan was paired with Maria Sanchez, a fiery woman in her early 40s who ran the center. She was skeptical of him from the start. "So you're the guy Grayson sent?" Maria asked, eyeing him up and down. "You don't look like much." Ethan smirked, used to the judgment. "And you don't look like someone who takes orders." Maria laughed, a sharp, unexpected sound. "Fair enough. Let's see if you're worth your salt." The tasks were grueling. Ethan sorted donations, cleaned storage rooms, and helped organize job fairs. Every so often, Maria would throw him a challenging look, as if daring him to quit. One afternoon, while cleaning out an old storage room, Ethan found himself alone with his thoughts. The silence was heavy, and memories crept in. Nights spent on the streets, the sting of rejection, the ache of hunger. He leaned against a shelf, closing his eyes. The overwhelming weight of the past threatened to crush him. He hadn't felt this vulnerable in years. A voice broke the silence. "Taking a break already?" It was Maria, arms crossed, a hint of a smile on her face. "Just thinking," Ethan muttered. She softened, stepping closer. "Thinking doesn't pay the bills, kid. But it can remind you why you're here." As the weeks went on, Ethan began to earn the trust of those around him. He formed a bond with a young boy named Jamal, whose mother was working 3 jobs to make ends meet. Jamal reminded Ethan of himself, sharp-witted, but hardened by circumstances. One day, Ethan found Jamal skipping his tutoring session. He tracked the boy down to a nearby basketball court. "Shouldn't you be in class?" Ethan asked, sitting on the edge of the court. Jamal shrugged. "What's the point? No one cares about kids like me." Ethan felt a pang of recognition. "I care," he said quietly. "And I know what it's like to feel invisible. But you're not." Jamal looked up, surprised. "How do you know?" "Because I've been where you are," Ethan admitted. "And someone gave me a chance. Now, it's my turn to do the same." Despite the progress, Ethan's insecurities lingered. One evening, he confronted David in his office. "Why does it feel like everyone's waiting for me to fail?" Ethan asked, his voice tinged with frustration. David leaned back in his chair, considering his words carefully. "Because people are afraid of change, Ethan. And you represent that change. But here's the thing. You don't need their approval. You just need to prove to yourself that you belong." Ethan nodded slowly, the words sinking in. The real test came during a city council meeting where the charity initiative was being reviewed. Ethan was asked to speak, a moment that filled him with dread. As he stepped up to the podium, he felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. He cleared his throat, gripping the edges of the podium. "My name is Ethan," he began, his voice steady but quiet. "I'm not a polished speaker, and I don't have a fancy resume. What I do have is experience. I've been where these people are, struggling, invisible, and desperate for a chance." The room was silent for a moment, before applause erupted. Ethan stepped back, his heart pounding, but a small smile tugged at his lips. That night, Ethan returned to his apartment, exhausted but proud. He found a note on the kitchen counter from Sarah. "Progress doesn't happen overnight, but you're proving every day that it's possible. Keep going." Ethan folded the note, slipping it into his pocket. For the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope, not just for himself, but for the future he was beginning to build. Ethan stared out of the large window of his apartment, the city lights shimmering like a sea of scattered jewels. He had come far from the street corners he once called home, but the path ahead felt even more daunting. David's voice echoed in his mind. "You don't need their approval. You just need to prove to yourself that you belong." The next morning, Ethan arrived at the community center, where Maria greeted him with her usual no-nonsense demeanor. "You're late," she said, glancing at her watch. Ethan smirked, holding up a bag of coffee. "Thought I'd bribe you with caffeine." Maria rolled her eyes, but took the cup. You'll need more than coffee to survive today. We're hosting a job fair, and it's all hands on deck. The center was buzzing with activity. Booths lined the walls, representatives from various companies setting up stations. Families milled about, their faces a mix of hope and apprehension. Ethan was assigned to assist at a booth for a tech startup. As he helped set up, he overheard snippets of conversations, people talking about their struggles, their dreams, their fears. It was overwhelming, yet strangely grounding. Among the attendees was Jamal's mother, Lisa, who approached Ethan with a tentative smile. I just wanted to thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jamal talks about you all the time. You've made a real difference in his life. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He's a great kid. He's the one doing the hard work. Lisa hesitated before continuing. I saw you speak at the council meeting. It was powerful. You've inspired a lot of us. The conversation was interrupted by a sharp voice behind them. Well, if it isn't the charity case turned poster boy, sneered a man in a tailored suit. Ethan turned to see Nathan Grayson, David's estranged younger brother. Nathan's smile didn't reach his eyes. I have to hand it to you, Ethan, Nathan continued. You've certainly mastered the art of playing the underdog. Ethan clenched his jaw, but before he could respond, Maria stepped in. Can I help you with something? She asked, her tone icy. Nathan chuckled. Just observing. Carry on. Nathan's presence cast a shadow over the day. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Nathan was watching him, waiting for him to fail. Later, as the job fair wound down, David arrived to check on the event. Ethan pulled him aside. Your brother was here, Ethan said bluntly. David's expression darkened. Nathan's always been complicated. He doesn't like what we're doing here. Why? Ethan asked. Because it threatens his worldview, David replied. And, frankly, his wallet. Ethan frowned. What do you mean, huh? David hesitated before answering. Let's just say Nathan has a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. That evening, Ethan found himself alone in his apartment, replaying the day's events. He couldn't shake the encounter with Nathan or the weight of the expectations placed on him. As he sifted through the notes Sarah had left for him earlier, one caught his eye. Progress is a series of small victories. Don't let the setbacks overshadow them. The words resonated deeply. Ethan thought about his past, the mistakes he'd made, and the people who had given up on him. But he also thought about the moments of kindness, the rare but powerful instances when someone had believed in him. A week later, Ethan faced his biggest challenge yet, hosting a workshop on personal growth for a group of young adults at the community center. Public speaking still terrified him, but David and Sarah had insisted it was an important step. The room was filled with skeptical faces as Ethan stepped up to the podium. I'm not here to tell you how to live your life, he began, his voice steady but soft. I'm here to tell you about mine. He shared his story, the highs and the crushing lows, the moments of despair and the glimmers of hope. He spoke about the importance of resilience, of finding strength in the unlikeliest of places. By the time he finished, the room was silent. Then, one by one, people began to clap. The success of the workshop was a turning point. Ethan began to take on more responsibilities, working closely with Maria and the other volunteers to expand the center's programs. He also started mentoring Jamal, helping the boy navigate the challenges of school and adolescence. Meanwhile, tensions with Nathan escalated. Rumors began to circulate about Nathan trying to sabotage the initiative, using his influence to sway city officials. David confronted Nathan during a family dinner, the argument spilling over into the public eye. "You're jeopardizing everything we've worked for," David shouted. "And you're throwing money at a lost cause," Nathan retorted. The confrontation made headlines, putting both the initiative and the Grayson family under intense scrutiny. Amid the chaos, Ethan found solace in his growing bond with Sarah. The two often stayed late at the center, sharing stories and brainstorming ideas. One evening, Sarah revealed a deeply personal story about her own struggles with trust and self-worth. "Helping others helped me heal," she admitted. "Maybe it can do the same for you." Her words stayed with Ethan, fueling his determination to prove himself, not just to others, but to himself. Ethan felt a surge of optimism as the fundraiser's success fueled the initiative with much-needed resources and attention. Yet the applause from the gala was barely a memory before new challenges began to emerge. Days after the gala, Maria barged into Ethan's office at the community center, her expression grim. "We've got a problem," she said, slapping a folder onto the desk. Inside were printouts of emails, financial records, and memos, evidence of embezzlement within the initiative. Ethan's stomach dropped as he recognized the signature at the bottom of one document. "Nathan Grayson." "How did you get these?" Ethan asked, his voice low but tense. "A whistleblower," Maria replied. "They didn't want their name revealed. But this is just the tip of the iceberg." Ethan knew confronting David about his brother would be delicate. David had always been protective of his family. Despite their strained relationships, when Ethan presented the evidence to David, the reaction was explosive. "This can't be true," David shouted, pacing his office. "Nathan may be a lot of things, but he wouldn't stoop this low." Ethan held his ground. "I didn't want to believe it either. But the evidence is clear. If we don't address this now, everything we've worked for could collapse." David hesitated, torn between loyalty to his family and his responsibility to the initiative. Finally, he sighed. "I'll handle it. But you need to focus on the bigger picture, keeping this place running." As David wrestled with the fallout of his brother's betrayal, Ethan faced challenges on multiple fronts. The community center was inundated with new families seeking assistance, stretching resources to their limits. Sarah, ever the steady force, stepped in to help. "We need to prioritize," she advised, laying out a plan to streamline operations. Their late-night strategy sessions became a regular occurrence, and Ethan found himself relying on her more than ever. Yet he couldn't ignore the unspoken tension between them, a mixture of admiration and something deeper. One evening, as Ethan locked up the center, he noticed a black SUV idling across the street. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as the vehicle's headlights flashed briefly before driving off. The next morning, Jamal approached him with wide eyes. "Mr. Ethan, there were some guys asking about you near my building last night. They didn't look friendly." Ethan's past instincts kicked in. He knew these weren't random occurrences. Someone was watching him, likely Nathan's associates, trying to intimidate him into silence. Determined to protect the initiative and the people who relied on it, Ethan turned to Sophia for help. "I need to know everything about Nathan's connections," Ethan said, handing her the whistleblower's files. Sophia nodded. "This could take time, but I'll dig into it. Just be careful, Ethan. If he's willing to go this far, he won't stop at threats." Meanwhile, Maria began working with a lawyer to secure the initiative's funds and ensure they couldn't be siphoned off. The tension escalated when Maria's car was vandalized, and Ethan received an anonymous note warning him to back off. David, now fully aware of his brother's involvement, confronted Nathan at a family gathering. "You've crossed a line, Nathan," David said, his voice low but firm. You're putting lives at risk." Nathan smirked, his demeanor unrepentant. "Don't act like you're some saint, David. You've always been about control. And this initiative is just another way to play the hero." The argument ended with Nathan storming out, leaving David to grapple with the reality of his brother's actions. Back at the community center, Sarah suggested reaching out to Detective Laura Bennett, a local officer with a reputation for taking on the corruption cases. "She's tough but fair," Sarah said. "And she's been looking into Nathan's associates for months." Ethan agreed, though he knew involving the police could escalate the situation further. Detective Bennett proved to be exactly as Sarah described, direct and unyielding. She listened to Ethan's account and reviewed the evidence with a critical eye. Ethan's voice rose in frustration. "What do you want me to do, Sarah? Sit back and let them destroy everything we've built?" Sarah's eyes softened, but her voice remained firm. "I just don't want to lose you." The weight of her words hung in the air, unspoken feelings bubbling to the surface. Despite the setbacks, Sophia's persistence paid off. She managed to recover partial data from the tracker, revealing a hidden account linked to Nathan's operations. Detective Bennett moved quickly, securing a warrant to freeze the account and investigate further. The breakthrough bolstered morale at the community center, but Ethan knew the fight was far from over. As he stood in the quiet hallway of the center that night, he whispered to himself, "One step at a time." The tension around the community center was palpable, a simmering pot ready to boil over. Ethan had always known that challenging corruption came with risks, but the relentless pressure from Nathan's network was testing his resolve, and the resolve of everyone involved. It started with subtle acts of intimidation. Flyers defaming the initiative were distributed in the neighborhood, accusing Ethan of mismanagement and fraud. Anonymous calls to the center's donors led to a sharp drop in funding. Maria's apartment was broken into, though nothing was stolen, sending a chilling message. "These people don't play fair," Maria said during an emergency meeting with Ethan and Sarah. "If we don't act fast, they'll destroy everything we've built." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. "We can't let them win. If we back down now, they'll keep doing this to others." The situation escalated when a fire broke out in one of the community center's storage facilities. Ethan arrived at the scene to find firefighters battling the blaze and several families huddled on the sidewalk, tears streaming down their faces. Sarah approached him, her expression grim. "It wasn't an accident, Ethan. Someone said it deliberately. The fire chief found traces of accelerant. The attack left the center without essential supplies and further strained its already tight budget." Ethan felt the weight of every loss, every displaced family, every fearful glance from the community. Determined not to let the community be cowed, Ethan organized a town hall meeting. The turnout was larger than expected, with residents crowding into the school gymnasium, their faces a mix of anger and fear. Ethan stepped onto the makeshift stage, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "They want us to be afraid," he began, his eyes scanning the crowd. "They want us to believe we're powerless. But look around you. This community is stronger than their threats." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. Ethan continued, "We've come too far to let them tear us apart. We need to stand together, support each other, and show them that we're not backing down." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was resolute. Despite the community's support, tensions within Ethan's inner circle began to surface. David was increasingly absent, consumed by the fallout from Nathan's actions. When Ethan confronted him, David snapped, "Do you think this is easy for me? Nathan's my brother. Do you know what it's like to choose between family and what's right?" Ethan's voice was calm but firm. This isn't just about you or your family, David. People are counting on us. The argument left their relationship strained, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that David's loyalty was wavering. Late one night, Ethan received a call from Detective Bennett. "You need to be careful," she warned. "We've intercepted chatter, suggesting Nathan's associates are planning something big. I'm increasing patrols near the center, but you need to stay vigilant." Ethan's heart sank. The idea of putting others in danger weighed heavily on him, but pulling back wasn't an option. A breakthrough came when Sophia uncovered a key location tied to Nathan's operation, a seemingly abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Detective Bennett coordinated a raid, but the operation was a disaster. The warehouse was empty, a carefully staged trap. As officers searched the building, a series of small explosions went off, injuring several and sending a clear message. Nathan's network was always one step ahead. The media seized on the failed raid, painting the initiative and its allies as reckless and incompetent. Ethan felt the sting of public criticism, even as he focused on the injured officers and reassured the community. Amid the chaos, Sarah brought Ethan a piece of unexpected news. "I've been working with some of the families Nathan's group targeted," she said. "One of them, Mrs. Lila Martinez, has agreed to testify. She has documents and recordings that could expose the whole operation." Ethan's eyes lit up with hope. This could be the break we've been waiting for. But Sarah's expression remained cautious. "She's terrified, Ethan. If Nathan finds out, she and her kids could be in serious danger." Ethan, Sophia, and Detective Bennett devised a plan to protect Lila and gather her evidence. It involved relocating her family to a safe house and using her information to secure additional warrants. The operation was fraught with tension. Nathan's men were everywhere, their black SUVs a constant ominous presence. During the relocation, one of the SUVs tailed the convoy. Ethan, riding in the car with Lila, made a split-second decision. "Take the kids and go," he told the driver. "I'll distract them." Before anyone could argue, Ethan jumped out of the car and darted into a nearby alley. The SUV followed, its tires screeching as it turned the corner. Ethan's heart pounded as he ran through the maze of alleys, the SUV close behind. He knocked over trash cans and leaped over obstacles, doing everything he could to slow his pursuers. Finally, he spotted a fire escape and scrambled up, narrowly avoiding capture. From the rooftop he watched as the SUV sped away, unable to find him. When he returned to the safe house hours later, bruised and exhausted, Sarah hugged him tightly. "Don't ever do that again," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan managed a weak smile. "It worked, didn't it?" Lila's testimony and evidence proved invaluable. With it, Detective Bennett secured warrants for several high-ranking members of Nathan's network. But Ethan knew the fight was far from over. As he stood in the quiet of the community center that night, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. "We're not done yet," he murmured to himself. "Not even close." Ethan entered the community center at dawn, the golden light filtering through the windows, a stark contrast to the darkness that had engulfed their efforts. Despite the mounting pressure, he felt a faint glimmer of hope. Lila's testimony had given them a fighting chance, but the battle was far from over. Detective Bennett's team wasted no time acting on the warrants. In the early hours of the morning, a coordinated series of arrests were carried out across the city. News outlets buzzed with stories of high-profile figures being taken into custody. Their connections to Nathan Grayson's network plastered across every headline. Ethan watched the coverage with Sarah and Maria, their eyes glued to the small TV in the center's break room. "It's the start," Sarah said cautiously. But Nathan's still out there. Ethan nodded, his jaw set. We've rattled him. Now, we need to finish this. While the arrests bolstered public support for the initiative, they also deepened the rift within David's family. Nathan's sudden disappearance following the raid left David grappling with conflicting emotions. At a tense family dinner, David's father slammed his fist on the table. "You've turned on your own blood," he growled, his face red with anger. "Whatever Nathan's done, he's still your brother." David stood his ground, his voice steady. "What he's done is destroy lives, and I won't be complicit in that." The argument ended with his father storming out, leaving David to pick up the pieces of a family fractured beyond repair. Back at the community center, Ethan focused on rallying the community. He organized a neighborhood cleanup event, turning it into a symbol of resilience and hope. Families came together to repaint walls, plant flowers, and repair the damage caused by Nathan's men. During the event, Jamal approached Ethan with a shy smile. "I made this for you," he said, handing Ethan a drawing of the center, surrounded by smiling faces. Ethan knelt down, taking the picture with a lump in his throat. "This is perfect, Jamal. Thank you." The moment reminded him why he had fought so hard. It wasn't just about justice. It was about giving people hope. As the community began to heal, Nathan's network struck back. A series of cyber attacks targeted the initiative's systems, erasing files, freezing bank accounts, and leaking confidential information. Sophia worked tirelessly to counter the attacks, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "They're not just trying to shut us down," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "They're trying to discredit us." Ethan leaned over her shoulder, his brow furrowed. "Can you trace it back to Nathan?" Sophia shook her head. "Not yet, but I'm working on it." The cyber attacks left Ethan scrambling to rebuild trust with donors and community members. He spent sleepless nights making phone calls, attending meetings, and reassuring everyone that the initiative was still strong. Amid the chaos, Ethan and Sarah found themselves spending more time together. Late one night, after a particularly grueling day, they sat on the center's rooftop, gazing at the city skyline. "You're really something. You know that?" Sarah said, breaking the silence. Ethan chuckled. "I don't feel like it. Half the time I'm just trying to keep my head above water." Sarah turned to him, her expression serious. "But you care. That's more than most people can say." For a moment their eyes met, and Ethan felt a spark he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge before. But before he could say anything, Sarah stood, brushing her hands on her jeans. "Come on," she said with a smile. "We've got work to do." Sophia finally caught a break in her investigation. Using the data recovered from Lila's evidence, she traced the cyber attacks to a secure server linked to one of Nathan's shell companies. "This is it," she said, her voice triumphant. "If we can access this server, we'll have everything we need to take him down." Ethan and Detective Bennett devised a plan to infiltrate the server's physical location, a heavily guarded office building downtown. "It's risky," Bennett warned, "but it's our best shot." Ethan nodded. "Let's do it." The operation was tense from the start. Ethan and Bennett posed as delivery workers, using fake IDs provided by Sophia to gain access to the building. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating, every security guard and camera a reminder of the stakes. As Sophia guided them remotely, Ethan and Bennett made their way to the server room. Just as they began downloading the files, an alarm blared. "Move!" Bennett shouted, pulling Ethan toward the exit. They barely escaped, the sound of shouting guards echoing behind them. Back at the safe house, Sophia analyzed the stolen data. What she found sent shockwaves through the group. "This isn't just about Nathan," she said. her voice trembling. He's connected to politicians, CEOs, law enforcement, people in positions of power across the city. Ethan stared at the screen, his stomach twisting. This goes deeper than we thought. The revelation made it clear that taking down Nathan wouldn't be enough. They were up against a system designed to protect itself. Determined to expose the corruption, Ethan turned to the community for help. He organized a rally in the city square, inviting residents, journalists, and activists to join the fight. The event drew a massive crowd, their voices echoing through the streets as they demanded justice. Ethan stood on the stage, his voice steady and powerful. "This isn't just about one man," he said. "It's about all of us, standing together against a system that preys on the vulnerable. They may have money and power, but we have something stronger: each other." The crowd erupted into cheers, their energy electric. As the rally ended, Ethan received a text from an unknown number. "You're making a mistake. Stop now, or you'll regret it." Ethan showed the message to Sarah, his jaw tightening. "They're scared," he said, "and that means we're winning." But as he looked out over the dispersing crowd, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was far from over. The day after the rally, the community center hummed with cautious optimism. Ethan sat in the small office, staring at the files Sophia had uncovered. His fingers traced the lines of names and connections, each one a thread in a vast web of corruption. Outside, the sound of children playing echoed through the halls. It was a stark contrast to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Detective Bennett arrived with grim news. 3 witnesses from the rally have already recanted their statements," she said, tossing a file onto Ethan's desk. "They've been threatened." Ethan leaned back, his frustration evident. "They're trying to intimidate us into silence." Bennett nodded. "And it's working. If we don't act fast, this whole thing falls apart." They decided to go public with the names and roles of key figures in Nathan's network. The risk was enormous, but so was the potential to rally more support. David Grayson found himself in a moral quagmire. His family's name was now synonymous with scandal, and his father's health had taken a turn for the worse. "You've destroyed this family," his sister hissed during a heated confrontation. "Is that what you wanted?" David's resolve wavered, but he thought of Ethan and the countless others who had suffered because of Nathan's greed. "I'm doing what's right," he said firmly, "even if it costs me everything." Sophia finally decrypted a crucial piece of data from the server, a series of encrypted emails linking Nathan to a powerful senator. "This could blow the case wide open," she said, her excitement barely contained. Ethan felt a surge of hope. "Let's make it count." The emails were leaked to the press, and the fallout was immediate. News anchors dissected every detail, and protests erupted across the city. But the exposure came at a cost. Ethan received another threat, this time more personal. "We know where you live. Walk away while you still can." Ethan's mind raced as he tightened security at the center and his own apartment. One evening, Sarah received a frantic call from her ex-husband, who had heard about the rally and the growing danger. "You need to stop this," he said, his voice shaking. "What about Lila? What if something happens to her?" Sarah's heart sank. She had worked so hard to shield her daughter from harm. But now the fight was at their doorstep. When she shared her fears with Ethan, he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're doing this for them," he said softly, "for a future where they don't have to live in fear." Nathan's retaliation escalated. His network planted false stories in the media, painting Ethan and the initiative as corrupt. Sophia worked around the clock to counter the disinformation campaign, but the damage was done. Donations dwindled, and volunteers grew hesitant. "We need something big," Bennett said during a tense meeting. "A move that forces their hand." Ethan and Bennett devised a bold plan, staging a sting operation to catch Nathan's associates red-handed. "This is insane," Sophia said, pacing the room. "What if it goes wrong?" Ethan met her gaze. "If we don't do this, everything we've worked for will be for nothing." The plan involved posing as potential investors in Nathan's illicit ventures. Ethan would go undercover, armed with hidden cameras provided by Sophia. The night of the operation, Ethan dressed in a tailored suit, his nerves frayed, but his determination unwavering. "Remember," Bennett said, adjusting his microphone, "stick to the script and don't take any unnecessary risks." Ethan entered the upscale restaurant, the air thick with tension. Nathan's associate, a slick businessman named Victor, greeted him with a practiced smile. As they discussed the investment opportunity, Ethan subtly guided the conversation toward illegal activities. Victor hesitated, then leaned in. "You realize what you're asking for isn't exactly legal." Ethan smiled. "I'm counting on it." Just as Ethan secured the incriminating evidence, Victor's demeanor shifted. "You seem awfully interested in the details," he said, his tone suspicious. Ethan's heart raced as Victor motioned to one of his bodyguards. Before things could escalate, Bennett and her team stormed the restaurant, arresting Victor and his men. The sting operation was a success, yielding a treasure trove of evidence. Ethan and Bennett spent hours reviewing the footage, piecing together the final pieces of the puzzle. Meanwhile, the public's trust in the initiative was restored. Donations poured in, and the community rallied behind Ethan once more. Nathan, now cornered, issued a public statement, denying all allegations and accusing Ethan of orchestrating a smear campaign. Ethan knew it was a desperate move, but he also understood it meant Nathan would stop at nothing to protect himself. Despite the mounting danger, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. The community center buzzed with activity, and Sarah's resilience inspired everyone around her. One evening, as Ethan walked through the center, he found Lila drawing at a table. "Look," she said, holding up a picture of a house surrounded by smiling faces. Ethan knelt down, his heart swelling with emotion. "That's beautiful, Lila. Is this your home?" She nodded. "It's where everyone's happy." For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a sense of peace. Late one night, Ethan received an anonymous tip. "Meet me at the old warehouse on 5th Street. I have information you'll want." Against Bennett's advice, Ethan decided to go. As he approached the warehouse, the air thick with tension, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. The warehouse loomed in the dim glow of street lights, its decaying exterior a stark reminder of the dangers Ethan was willing to face. The faint echo of his footsteps resonated in the emptiness as he stepped inside, the air thick with the scent of rust and mildew. "Hello?" Ethan's voice broke the silence, carrying a mix of caution and determination. A figure emerged from the shadows, Victor, the same associate from the sting operation. Ethan's heart sank as he realized this was not the informant he had hoped for. "We meet again, Mr. Carter," Victor sneered, his voice laced with mockery. Victor's men appeared, surrounding Ethan, their expressions cold and calculated. Ethan's mind raced, searching for an escape route. "You've made some powerful enemies," Victor said, circling him. "Nathan doesn't like loose ends." Ethan held his ground, refusing to let fear dictate his actions. "And yet, here I am," he replied. Victor chuckled, signaling to one of his men. They pulled out a laptop, displaying live footage of Sarah's trailer and the community center. "You've built quite the network," Victor said, It'd be a shame if something happened to it. As tension reached its peak, Ethan noticed a flicker of movement outside the warehouse. A moment later, Detective Bennett and her team stormed the building, their weapons drawn. "Freeze!" Bennett's voice echoed through the space as chaos erupted. Ethan seized the opportunity to knock over a nearby table, creating a barrier. In the ensuing commotion, Victor and his men attempted to flee, but were quickly subdued by the officers. "You took a hell of a risk," Bennett said, her tone equal parts relief and frustration as she helped Ethan to his feet. Back at the precinct, Victor's laptop revealed a treasure trove of information: bank transactions, encrypted communications, and a list of Nathan's key allies. "This is it," Sophia said, her eyes scanning the screen. "We finally have enough to take down Nathan and his entire operation." But Ethan's mind lingered on the footage of the community center. "We need to secure everyone involved," he said. "They'll retaliate harder now." As expected, Nathan struck back. His associates orchestrated a smear campaign against Ethan and the initiative, flooding social media with false narratives and doctored evidence. The community center became a target for vandalism, its walls defaced with hateful messages. Sarah found herself at the center of the storm, receiving anonymous threats. One night, a brick shattered her window, narrowly missing Lila. "I can't keep putting her in danger," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "You're not alone in this," Ethan assured her. "We'll protect each other." Ethan and Sophia decided to take the fight to Nathan's doorstep. They leaked a portion of the evidence to the press, exposing his financial ties to corrupt politicians and business leaders. The media frenzy was immediate, with news outlets dissecting every detail. Public outcry grew, putting immense pressure on Nathan and his allies. But Nathan retaliated by bribing law enforcement officials to raid the community center under false pretenses. Despite the setbacks, Ethan refused to back down. He organized a town hall meeting, inviting community members and journalists to hear the truth. The meeting was held in the damaged community center, its walls adorned with messages of hope and resilience. "We've faced threats, lies, and violence," Ethan said, his voice steady. "But we're still standing. Together we can end this." The crowd erupted in applause, their support reigniting Ethan's determination. Inspired by Ethan's resolve, Sarah decided to share her story publicly. She appeared on a local news segment, recounting her journey from despair to hope. "I was afraid," she admitted, "but fear won't protect my daughter's future. Only courage will." Her words resonated with viewers, leading to an outpouring of support for the initiative. Donations surged, and volunteers returned in droves. With newfound momentum, Sophia cracked the final layer of encryption on Victor's laptop, revealing a secret meeting between Nathan and his top associates. "This is our chance to catch them all in one place," Bennett said. The plan was risky, but necessary. They coordinated with federal agents to raid the meeting, ensuring no one escaped. The operation was executed with precision. Federal agents stormed the luxurious mansion where the meeting was held, arresting Nathan and his associates. Ethan watched from a distance as Nathan was led away in handcuffs, his expression a mix of rage and defeat. "It's over," Bennett said, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Ethan shook his head. "Not yet. The fight for justice doesn't end here." In the weeks that followed, the community center became a symbol of resilience. Volunteers worked tirelessly to repair the damage, transforming it into a sanctuary for those in need. Sarah and Lila moved into a safer neighborhood, their lives finally free from the shadow of Nathan's threats. One evening, Ethan received a letter from an anonymous supporter. Inside was a simple message: "Thank you for giving us hope." As Ethan stood outside the community center, watching children play and families gather, he felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known in years. "We did it," Sarah said, joining him. "No," Ethan replied, smiling. "We're just getting started." The days following Nathan's arrest brought a tentative sense of relief to the community. People whispered cautiously about the fall of a tyrant. Their hope mingled with lingering fear. Ethan stood outside the community center, observing as volunteers repaired the damaged walls. Sarah approached, holding a cup of coffee. "You've done something incredible here," she said, her voice warm but tinged with concern. Ethan shook his head. "It's not over yet. Nathan may be in custody, but his network didn't operate on its own. There are still pieces we need to uncover." Sophia worked tirelessly with federal agents to analyze the data from Nathan's laptop. Her office was littered with papers and digital equipment, the air buzzing with her determination. "I've got something," she announced during a meeting with Ethan, Detective Bennett, and a few federal agents. Nathan was only the front man. There are others, politicians, business leaders, and even law enforcement officials, who kept his operation running smoothly. Detective Bennett frowned, her jaw tightening. "This goes deeper than we thought." Sophia nodded. "And they're already trying to cover their tracks. We have a small window to act before they disappear." As they prepared their next move, the remaining members of Nathan's network struck back. Sarah's new home was vandalized, with threatening messages spray-painted across the front door. The community center received anonymous calls, warning Ethan to back off. One night, a firebomb was thrown into the building, causing extensive damage. Despite these attacks, Ethan refused to back down. "They're desperate," he told the gathered volunteers. "They know we're close to exposing the truth." In their search for more evidence, Ethan and Sophia reached out to a surprising source, Victor, the associate who had been arrested during the warehouse raid. Victor sat across from them in the interrogation room, his hands cuffed. His face was pale, his bravado replaced with fear. "I want immunity," he said, his voice trembling. "Nathan's people will kill me if I talk." Sophia leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "You give us everything, names, locations, financial records, and we'll see what we can do." Victor hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. But you didn't hear this from me." Victor's information led them to a remote estate on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling property owned by one of Nathan's top associates, Thomas Grayson. "This is where the real power lies," Victor explained. "Grayson has files on everyone, bribes, blackmail, you name it. If you take him down, the entire network crumbles." Detective Bennett coordinated with federal agents to plan a raid on the estate. "We'll need to move quickly," she said. "If Grayson gets wind of this, he'll destroy the evidence." The night of the raid was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Ethan insisted on being there, despite Bennett's protests. "You're not law enforcement," she said. "This is dangerous." "I've been in danger since the day I decided to fight back," Ethan replied firmly. The operation began smoothly, with agents securing the perimeter. But as they entered the estate, they encountered heavy resistance. Grayson's security team fought fiercely, their loyalty bought with promises of protection and wealth. Amid the chaos, Ethan found himself face to face with Grayson in a lavish office. "You're just like Nathan," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. Grayson smirked. "And you're just a fool trying to play hero. You think this ends with me? There will always be others." As agents subdued the remaining guards, Sophia rushed into the office with a laptop and several hard drives. "We've got it," she said breathlessly. "Everything we need to dismantle the network." Grayson was handcuffed and led away, his defiance replaced by the grim realization of his defeat. Ethan watched as the estate was secured, a sense of accomplishment washing over him. But he knew the fight wasn't over. The evidence retrieved from Grayson's estate implicated numerous high-profile individuals. Media outlets exploded with the revelations, and public outrage reached a fever pitch. Protests erupted across the city, demanding accountability and systemic change. Ethan found himself thrust into the spotlight, his story inspiring others to take a stand. But with the attention came new challenges. His past was scrutinized, and detractors tried to discredit him. "They're scared of what you represent," Sarah said, during a quiet moment at the community center. "You've shown them that even the most vulnerable can fight back." Despite the obstacles, the community rallied around Ethan and his team. Volunteers worked tirelessly to rebuild the center, transforming it into a symbol of resilience and hope. Sarah organized a fundraiser to support the initiative, drawing attendees from across the city. Ethan was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. "We're not just rebuilding walls," Sarah said during her speech. "We're rebuilding lives." The days following the raid on Grayson's estate were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. The evidence gathered had not only exposed the key players in Nathan's network, but had also uncovered systemic issues within local institutions. Ethan stood at the heart of the movement, the community center now doubling as a hub for advocacy and support. Volunteers and families filled the space, organizing protests, legal aid, and counseling sessions. "This is more than we ever imagined," Sarah said, walking beside Ethan as they surveyed the bustling activity. Ethan nodded, a mixture of pride and exhaustion etched on his face. "We've shaken the tree. Now we need to catch the falling branches." Sophia, working late in her makeshift command center, uncovered a hidden cache of emails linking Grayson's operations to influential politicians. Her findings revealed how corruption had enabled the network to flourish for years. "This isn't just about Nathan or Grayson," she explained during a strategy meeting with Ethan, Sarah, and Detective Bennett. "This is about dismantling a system that prioritizes profit over people." Detective Bennett leaned forward, her expression determined. "If we can get a conviction against these officials, we'll send a message that no one is above the law." As progress was being made, resistance grew fiercer. Anonymous threats poured in, targeting Ethan and his closest allies. One evening, as Sarah was leaving the community center, she noticed a shadowy figure watching from across the street. Her unease grew when she received a cryptic note slipped under her car's windshield. "Stay out of this, if you know what's good for you." When Ethan heard about the incident, his resolve hardened. "They're trying to scare us because they know we're winning," he said. "But we won't back down." Meanwhile, Ethan made a bold decision to confront one of the politicians implicated in Sophia's findings. He arranged a meeting with Senator Harold Green, a prominent figure whose campaign donations had been linked to Grayson's accounts. The meeting took place in a secluded cafe, far from prying eyes. "I know who you are," Green said, his voice dripping with disdain as he sipped his coffee. "And I know what you're trying to do. But let me give you some advice. This fight is bigger than you." Ethan leaned forward, his tone steady. "I'm not here to fight you, Senator. I'm here to ask for your help. If you come forward and cooperate, you could be remembered as someone who chose the right side of history." Green hesitated, the weight of his choices evident in his expression. "You think it's that simple?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "It's never simple," Ethan replied. "But it's necessary." Ethan's growing prominence drew scrutiny, and his past became public knowledge. Media outlets ran stories about his time on the streets, painting him alternately as a hero and a fraud. It's like they're trying to erase everything we've done, Ethan vented during a meeting with Sarah and Sophia. They're trying to discredit you, Sarah said, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. But the truth speaks louder than their lies. Focus on the people who believe in what we're doing. Despite the negativity, Ethan received overwhelming support from the community. Families who had been helped by the movement shared their stories, turning the tide of public opinion. The community center hosted a rally, drawing hundreds of attendees. Sarah delivered a powerful speech, her voice ringing with conviction. "We are not just victims," she declared. "We are survivors, fighters, and builders of a better future. Together, we can dismantle the systems that have failed us and replace them with something stronger." The crowd erupted in applause, their energy fueling Ethan's determination. Sophia received an encrypted message from an anonymous source claiming to have crucial information about the network's remaining operations. The message led her and Ethan to a secluded warehouse, where they met a whistleblower, a former accountant for Grayson's organization. The man, nervous but resolute, handed over a USB drive. "This has everything you need to connect the dots. Bank accounts, offshore holdings, shell companies, it's all there," he said. "Why are you helping us?" Ethan asked. "Because I can't live with the guilt anymore," the man replied, his voice trembling. The data from the whistleblower provided the final pieces of the puzzle. Sophia worked around the clock to compile the evidence into a comprehensive report, which was submitted to federal prosecutors. As arrests were made and indictments issued, the community celebrated small victories. Amid the progress, Ethan faced his own challenges. The relentless pace of their efforts took a toll on his mental health, and he struggled to balance his role as a leader with his personal well-being. Sarah, noticing his fatigue, urged him to take a step back. "You can't pour from an empty cup," she said gently. Reluctantly, Ethan agreed to delegate more responsibilities to the growing team of volunteers. The atmosphere at the community center was electric. The mural of the Phoenix, now complete, had become a rallying symbol for the people. Volunteers were busy distributing flyers, organizing workshops, and providing legal aid to victims of Grayson's network. Ethan, standing at the center of it all, addressed the group. "We've started something bigger than ourselves. This isn't just about justice for a few. It's about creating a system where this kind of abuse can never happen again." Cheers erupted from the crowd, their energy palpable. Sophia's detailed report, bolstered by the whistleblower's data, caught the attention of national media outlets. Ethan and Sarah were invited to appear on a primetime talk show to discuss the movement. The studio was a stark contrast to the community center, a gleaming stage with bright lights and polished hosts. "Ethan, you've gone from living on the streets to leading one of the most impactful grassroots movements in recent history," the host began. "What drives you?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, then said, "It's not about where I came from. It's about where we're all going. Change isn't easy, but it starts with believing that no one is too small to make a difference." Sarah added, "And it's about supporting one another. What we've achieved wasn't done alone. It was the result of a community coming together." Their words resonated, sparking a surge of donations and volunteers from across the country. As the movement gained traction, it began to face political resistance. Several officials implicated in the scandal launched a smear campaign against Ethan and his team. One particularly scathing article accused Ethan of exploiting his past for personal gain. The headline read, "From homeless to opportunist, the truth behind Ethan's rise." Ethan tossed the newspaper aside, frustration etched on his face. "They're trying to distract from the real issue," he said during a meeting with Sarah and Sophia. "But we can't ignore it," Sarah replied. "We need to control the narrative." The team decided to host a press conference, inviting journalists to the community center. Ethan spoke candidly about his journey, emphasizing transparency and the movement's goals. "The truth will always outshine the lies," he concluded, his voice steady. While the movement gained momentum, tensions simmered within the community. Some residents, fearful of retaliation, accused Ethan of bringing unnecessary attention to their struggles. A heated town hall meeting highlighted these divisions. "You're putting us all at risk," one man shouted. "What if they come after our families?" Ethan responded calmly. "I understand your fear. It's real and it's valid. But if we don't stand together now, when will we? Change requires courage, and that courage starts with us." His words were met with a mix of applause and murmurs of dissent. The weight of the movement took its toll on Ethan. He spent long nights strategizing with Sophia and Sarah, often neglecting his own well-being. One evening, Sarah found him asleep at his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers. She gently shook him awake. "You can't keep doing this to yourself," she said, concern in her voice. I can't let this fall apart," Ethan murmured, rubbing his eyes. "It won't," Sarah reassured him, "because it's not just you holding it together. We're all in this." Her words gave him a momentary sense of relief. Sophia's relentless efforts uncovered a surprising ally. Senator Harold Green, the politician Ethan had confronted earlier. Green, guilt-ridden and facing mounting pressure, decided to testify against his former associates. His testimony provided critical evidence that implicated several high-ranking officials. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan asked during a private meeting. "Because I've spent too long looking the other way," Green admitted. "It's time I did something right." The movement's persistence paid off when the first major conviction was announced. Nathan Grayson, the architect of the network, received a life sentence without parole. The courtroom erupted in applause as the judge delivered the verdict. Ethan, sitting beside Sarah and Sophia, felt a surge of relief and pride. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of supporters cheered and held up signs that read, "Justice for all." With Grayson's conviction, Ethan began to focus on the bigger picture. He proposed a nationwide initiative to address systemic issues that allowed such exploitation to thrive. "We need to go beyond this one case," he said during a strategy meeting. "We need policies that protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable." The initiative, dubbed the Phoenix Project, aimed to provide resources for victims, advocate for legal reforms, and educate communities about their rights. The morning sky was an ominous gray as Ethan and his team prepared for what they knew would be the defining moment of their movement. The Phoenix Project had brought the issue to a boiling point, and tonight's charity gala, hosted by some of the city's most influential figures, was their opportunity to expose the last remnants of the trafficking network. Ethan stood in the community center, staring at the map of connections pinned to the wall. Each red string represented a person or entity complicit in the network's operations. "We're ready," Sophia said, stepping beside him. "Tonight, we unveil the truth." Ethan nodded, his jaw tight with determination. "Let's make sure it's something they can't ignore." The team worked tirelessly to finalize their plan. Sarah coordinated with the volunteers who would provide support from the community center, ready to send evidence to media outlets in real time. Sophia, with her tech expertise, had set up a secure system to project incriminating footage and documents during the gala. Detective Laura Bennett, who had been instrumental in gathering insider information, briefed Ethan on the potential risks. Jonas and his people will be there, Laura warned. They'll try to shut you down if they get even a whiff of what you're planning. Ethan met her gaze. Then we'll make sure they don't see it coming. The gala was a spectacle of opulence. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above the crowd, and the room buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. Ethan entered in a tailored suit, a stark contrast to his former life. David Grayson, whose involvement in the movement had remained behind the scenes, stood by Ethan's side. "Remember," David said, his voice low, "this is their world. But tonight, it becomes ours." Ethan scanned the room, his eyes landing on Jonas Blackwell. The man exuded confidence, surrounded by his usual entourage. "Show time," Ethan murmured, his pulse quickening. As the event progressed, Ethan took the stage, under the guise of giving a speech about social change. The crowd quieted, their attention drawn to him. "Good evening," Ethan began, his voice steady. "We're here tonight to celebrate progress, to recognize the power of community. But progress requires honesty. And tonight, it's time to be honest about what's been happening in our city." Behind him, the screen lit up with images and documents detailing the network's activities. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Sophia narrated the evidence from her position in the control room. Jonas's face darkened, and he rose from his seat. "This is a farce," he shouted, trying to interrupt. Ethan didn't falter. "Sit down, Jonas," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The evidence speaks for itself." The room erupted into pandemonium. Jonas's men attempted to shut down the presentation, but Laura and a group of undercover officers intercepted them. Ethan descended from the stage, walking straight toward Jonas. "It's over," he said, his voice calm but firm. Jonas smirked, though his confidence wavered. "You think this changes anything? People like me don't fall that easily." Ethan leaned in, his gaze unwavering. "You already have." As the chaos settled, police officers moved in to arrest Jonas and several of his associates. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Jonas was led away in handcuffs. Ethan stood at the center of the room, his chest heaving with the weight of what they had just accomplished. Sarah approached him, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it," she said. "We did it," Ethan corrected, his voice soft but resolute. Back at the community center, the team gathered to celebrate their victory. The atmosphere was a mix of relief and exhaustion. "We've taken down the head," Sophia said, raising a glass. "Now, we make sure the system doesn't rebuild itself." Ethan smiled, though his expression was tinged with weariness. "The fight's not over, but tonight, we celebrate." Later that night, Ethan sat alone in the quiet of the community center. The mural of the phoenix seemed to glow in the dim light, a symbol of rebirth and resilience. Sarah joined him, handing him a cup of tea. "You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders," she said gently. "In a way, I am," Ethan replied, "but I wouldn't trade it for anything." "You've done something incredible," Sarah said. "And this is just the beginning." Ethan nodded, his resolve strengthening. "Then we keep going." The early morning light spilled across the city, painting a picture of renewal. For Ethan, the events of the gala felt both like a triumphant end and a daunting beginning. The takedown of Jonas Blackwell had exposed the hidden network, but the deeper roots of corruption still loomed large. At the community center, volunteers bustled about, carrying boxes of supplies and setting up programs for families who had been affected by the trafficking ring. The once empty halls now buzzed with life, filled with laughter and hope. Ethan sat in a corner, reviewing documents detailing the next steps for the Phoenix Project. Despite the exhaustion etched on his face, his eyes burned with purpose. Ethan made it a point to meet the families whose lives had been shattered by the network. Among them was Maria, a young mother who had been manipulated into debt by Jonas. Holding her baby in her arms, Maria expressed her gratitude with tears streaming down her face. "You gave us hope when we thought there was none," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan shook his head. "You found the strength within yourself, Maria. We just gave you the tools to use it." As the center flourished, Sarah found herself reflecting on her own transformation. From a mother struggling to survive to a leader in the community, her journey had been nothing short of remarkable. One afternoon, Sarah stood before a group of women in a workshop titled Empowerment Through Action. She shared her story, emphasizing the importance of resilience and unity. "We are not defined by the challenges we face," she began, her voice firm. "We are defined by how we rise above them." The applause was thunderous, and Sarah felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced in years. Ethan, Sophia, and Sarah worked tirelessly to formalize the Phoenix Foundation, an organization dedicated to providing resources, education, and legal aid to vulnerable populations. Sophia spearheaded the technology initiatives, ensuring that the foundation used innovative tools to identify and prevent exploitation. Her cyber expertise had been crucial in dismantling Jonas's network, and now it served a greater purpose. Detective Laura Bennett joined as a liaison between the foundation and law enforcement, bridging the gap between the two worlds. Her insights proved invaluable in shaping policies that prioritized victims' welfare. David, who had remained a quiet but steadfast supporter, stepped forward with a significant financial contribution. His generosity allowed the foundation to expand its reach, opening satellite offices in other cities. In a private conversation with Ethan, David admitted, "This is my way of atoning for the years I spent turning a blind eye to the suffering around me." Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're doing more than atoning, David. You're helping to build something that will outlast all of us." Amid the whirlwind of activity, Ethan found moments to reflect on his personal growth. He visited the park, where he had once slept as a homeless man, the memories of despair juxtaposed with the hope he now carried. He also reconnected with old friends from his time on the streets, inviting them to the community center and offering them opportunities to rebuild their lives. One friend, Marcus, marveled at Ethan's transformation. "You're not just surviving anymore, man. You're thriving." Ethan smiled, the weight of his journey evident in his eyes. "It's not just about me, Marcus. It's about all of us." To mark the official launch of the Phoenix Foundation, the community organized a celebration at the center. The event was a vibrant tapestry of cultures, with music, food, and heartfelt speeches. Ethan took the stage, his voice steady despite the emotions welling up inside him. "This foundation isn't just an organization," he began. "It's a testament to what we can achieve when we come together. It's a promise that no one will ever have to face these challenges alone again." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the night. Later that evening, Ethan stood alone on the rooftop of the center, gazing at the city skyline. Sarah joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. "You did it," she said softly. "We did it," Ethan corrected, his gaze unwavering. "And we're just getting started." Sarah nodded, her expression one of quiet determination. "This is the beginning of something much bigger than any of us." As the lights fade on this chapter of resilience and transformation, the journey of Ethan, Sarah, and the community they've built is far from over. Their fight to create a brighter, safer future for those in need continues, and so does the promise of hope they represent. What would you have done if faced with the same choices as Ethan or Sarah? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to be part of this incredible journey. There's so much more to come. Stories of courage, redemption, and the power of unity. Hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter of this powerful tale. Together, let's keep spreading hope, one story at a time.